Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special edition of Wrestling with the Future. I'm your host, Psychic Medium Angelo, joined by my co-host, Dan the Man Sebastiano, and filmmaker, director, actor, producer, Mike Messier. Tonight, we're going to remember the life and legacy of Owen Hart, a man many called the King of Hearts. And we'll get into that in just a minute, but we're going to do a little housekeeping. And so, Mikey, let's start off with you tonight. And so tell me, what have we not missed this week in the world of wrestling?
Well, I mean,
I want to know.
As far as the ins and outs of the wrestling business, Drew Gulak, who had just lost a match in the Intercontinental title tournament to Daniel Bryan. Apparently, after that taping, he and the WWE are no longer working together. Depends on who you ask if he was released. One story goes that he asked for more money and then they decided to release him or not renew his contract. So I think it was actually a non-contract renewal, if you want to get technical. I don't know if he'll be free to work anywhere else in the near future or if he's got a no-compete clause. I'm not sure of all the specifics.
He's got a 90-day no-compete. That's it. It's a fairly straight up, simple contract. He's got a 90-day no compete. So 3 months hanging around the house or, cutting his grass or doing his laundry, going shopping for the wife. And then he can get back to knocking on Tony Khan's door. Because that's what it looks like is going to happen. Mike, I heard the same thing. I heard it was a contract dispute. If it's any consolation, if anybody has been following the news, there's a lot of turmoil right now in the halls of WWE. A lot of people asking for the release. A lot of people want to go now. They don't want to wait out their 90-day no-compete clause. Some adamantly, including, by the way, a few women, more than a few, 6 or 7 that I'm hearing. Some surprising names among them, actually. And you might be surprised to find out who and where they end up.
Anything you can share with us, Angelo, or no?
say again, Mike?
Anything you can share with the audience or no, as far as...
Not right now. I may be able to tomorrow, but not right now. 24 hours makes a big difference in this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So maybe tomorrow, but we're hearing some very interesting names. Real interesting, especially on the female side.
Interesting.
The other thing that happened, speaking of female wrestlers, Becky Lynch, I guess, is, for lack of a better word, Dan, retired or on the shelf or what?
Despite what the internet community seems to always, how conspiracies flow around here. Her pregnancy is very real. She's obviously, for that reason, unable to compete, stepping away. Now there's a debate now among reporters about whether or not she's going to be paid through her contract because whether or not there was a pregnancy clause involved. Becky Lynch's name came up a couple of times. Several high-profile commentators from Jim Cornette and Dave Meltzer have all given their opinions on it, some of which have set social media a bit of firestorm.
Yeah.
Personally.
Surprise, right, Dan?
My opinion on the thing, I don't agree with the view of birth as itself, but I agree with the point Jim Cornette raised that by having her go out there in the teary-eyed, they let me play this character for all these years and it's my dream come true. Becky Lynch's mantra is gone. She can never be the man. She can never be the last kicker again. Her entire goodbye speech was, I was playing a character. My dream came true. And everything you saw me do was, I was acting. Thank you. And I mean, she could come back. Who knows? But she'll never be able to be the man again. She's got to be just another human female performer who retired to have some kids.
Dan, I will tell you, if there was any doubt as to whether kayfabe is dead, she just put the final nail in the coffin.
Exactly.
So it's interesting because we had a very spirited debate in the last couple of shows, in fact, about kayfabe.
Mm-hmm.
I actually interviewed a man who I call the gatekeeper of kayfabe, Bill Apter. And if there's any doubt as to whether, great book.
Haven't been able to put it down since I got it.
It's a great book. I'm telling you. I have the audio version because I don't like to read. I like to listen. So, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think it was, it's going to come back to bite everyone on the ass, quite frankly.
Yeah.
It's already bit Becky. It's going to bite the WWE financially because whether anyone wants to admit it or believe it, she was, in fact, the #1 superstar in that company, male or female.
That's right. They said she was the #1 merch seller. She's the first person since he's kind of started to phase out that unseated John Cena.
Yeah.
And
that's a fact.
I mean, you have a multi-million-dollar box office attraction merch seller who, you know, and most of that merch came from the man and the mantra and her persona, which is now completely shattered. I mean, how many more?
It's interesting. Do you know where she got the moniker The Man? Do you know where that came from?
Because she beat Ric Flair's daughter, right?
No.
Okay.
Came from Mick Foley.
Okay.
They were at a hockey game together. And Mick Foley, of course, you know, he's got history with Ric Flair.
Right.
That was his veiled dig at Ric Flair. Call yourself the man. And she did.
Yeah.
Rick was going to sue her for a while. Remember that?
Yeah, well, that would, you know, as I always like to say, that would have went over like a fart in church.
Well, and it's funny because Seth Rollins also he called himself the man for a while. So you kind of had a three-way battle when she first started using it.
Brother, if you made a highlight reel of every wrestler that's ever called themselves the man,
right,
you could have about a 2.5-hour highlight reel.
Yeah, what a terrible nickname. Why would anyone ever want to use that?
All right. Hey guys, I gotta
the shit out of me.
I gotta say this though. We gotta remember that Becky Lynch, the Bellas, and a lot of these other female wrestlers, they're not designed and marketed to guys like us. They're marketed to teenage girls.
Right.
Because I think Stephanie McMahon especially is probably looking at that female market, and a show like Total Divas, Total Bellas, and even, you know, Becky Lynch, Ronda Rousey, they're trying to get the young female audience.
Yeah.
And so for one of them to see one of their heroes, Becky Lynch, transition into motherhood, and even if she takes 2 years off before ever having another match, that's someone that young women can relate to. So maybe from the Jim Cornette perspective, it's a waste of $1 million a year and all the things that he said. But if you're looking at it from a 13-year-old girl, 15-year-old girl, 30-year-old woman, they relate to having children. They relate to having the desire to have it all, the career and the kids, right? And the home life.
Of course.
So for them, that's the princess getting the everything. She's got it all. So in a sense,
well, in a perfect world, and in a perfect world, that makes perfect sense. But we're talking about far from perfect world. We know this.
I think too, if you look at what was her name, Izzy, the little girl NXT that became real famous for being a Bayley fan. Yeah, I think for every one of her who's going to look at Becky Lynch in some grandiose scheme, you have 3 or 4 people, like the girls I watch wrestling with, who are now turned off by the product. And let's be honest, some of those girls that might be Becky Lynch might be marketing to, they're not the ones buying the merchandise. They're not the ones paying for the tickets.
They're not. That's a very good point. No, they are not the ones buying the merch. People need to understand that. It's not the kids buying the merch.
Right.
It's mom and dad buying the merch for the kid.
Exactly.
So understand that. 13, 14-year-old girls don't walk around with $300-400 in their pocket.
Well, and that's the thing. You look at the numbers when they talk about, you know, the highest selling items of the last decade or whatever, and you have your John Cena youth clothes, but then you've also got your Hulkamania T-shirt, your NWO T-shirt, and your Austin 316. It's not kids 12 and under buying NWO Hulkamania 316 shirts. That's what people our age.
Sure, of course. Of course. Well, that's the nostalgia factor as well.
Exactly.
It's also a market that has expendable income.
That's true.
And we need to remember that. Well, now we have an interesting turn of events here. Things are starting to open up a little bit around the country, and there are some indie promotions that are actually letting people in. I had a conversation the other night with Bill Apter. I said, Bill, we've gotten used to this empty arena era. What's it going to look like when people come back? How are they going to react? And he jokingly said, he pulls out his phone and says, let me call them all, and I'll tell you in a minute. But the jest behind it is actually serious. What is it going to look like, Dan?
Honestly, I think with as poor a quality as the empty arena shows have been, and that's across the board. AEW started well. Their last few shows have been incredibly disappointing and silly. I think some of the crowds that were going to the shows aren't going to show up. I mean, the cable numbers and ticket sales were already almost at their lowest.
Oh my God!
I think some of your indie promotions with your popular local crowds, here in Virginia, where you are up in Philadelphia, they're still going to show up. I'll go support the indie show.
God, sure.
I'm not tripping over myself to buy tickets next time SmackDown comes to Norfolk.
Yeah. Mikey, where do we go from here?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, I think, it's one of those things where there's a balance between commerce and risk of health. And I think that, pro wrestling has kind of chugged along kind of under the radar doing these empty arena shows. In AEW's case, they've put wrestlers in the audience. The last AEW taping, there seemed to be a few outsiders in the audience, maybe just a few selected people that they put in the stands at Daly's Place in Jacksonville, not too far from me. So where do we go from here? I think that's still a wait and see thing. But one thing that is clear is that these ratings continue to go down. And if you care about wrestling like the three of us do and the listeners to our show do, that's not something any of us wants to see as far as the ratings continuing to plummet.
I pointed out to Bill Apter the other night that wrestling fans are a different kind of animal. They really are. I have this sneaky suspicion that wrestling fans are going to pick up, tell me I'm wrong, Dan, but I think they're going to pick up right where they left off, to be honest with you. I really do.
Your core audience will absolutely, honestly, look at AEW, their ratings really haven't shifted much. That audience, the Kenny Omega fans and your Young Buck fans, they're going to show up regardless.
Yeah.
Your people willing to drop $400-600 for a front row seat at Raw every week or every time they're in town, they'll be there. I think really, that's the thing with the ratings drop is it has a floor. There's about 1.2 million, give or take, rating average of people that are going to watch wrestling every week. It could be Vince McMahon coming out, having a puppet show, or Triple H wrestling a broom handle, and they would watch every week regardless.
Yeah.
And
sure.
I think you're not going to lose that base, so they'll pick up right where you left off.
They'll always have their I think, Dan, you're right. I think they'll always have their niche audience. Something that both Cornette and Russo have, as funny as much as these guys hate each other,
right?
How often they say the same damn thing. It's just, I shake my head because it's almost comical at this point. But Cornette and Russo basically said the same thing. The niche market is always going to be there. You're going to have, like Dan said, your core audience will never leave you. They don't care if Triple H wrestles that broom handle, or if Vince comes out, with a madam puppet, hanging off his, longy. It doesn't matter. People are going to watch.
Right.
Oh, look, Vince has a puppet hanging from his cock.
Bray Wyatt's puppets have been over more so than a lot of the wrestlers in the past year.
And that's a scary thought, brother.
Yeah.
Scary thought.
Those puppets are bigger than Rocco at the Legion of Doom in 1992.
Well, Dan, who would ever thought, Dan, that a white sock with black magic marker would get over on Mick Foley's hand?
Right.
Who'd have thunk it?
Yeah.
Mr. Sacco. Okay, for real? Okay.
Hey, sometimes you get those little things that work, and sometimes you get, you see those ideas, and it's like the goon or the gobbledygook, where there's no way anybody in that room legitimately thought that was going to happen.
$3 white athletic sock.
Yep.
With
you know what?
With a face drawn on it.
As over as that is, Mick Foley will spend pennies on the dollar selling merchandise for the rest of his life, because everybody that comes to see him is going to bring a sock, and all he needs is a bag of Sharpies and some dollar store tube socks, and he'll make a killing every appearance he makes.
$20 a pop.
There you go.
Yes, sir. Mike Messier.
Yes.
We're here tonight to both celebrate and remember a guy who left us way too soon, way too soon. Probably in a lot of people's opinions, including so-called smart wrestling fans, Owen Hart may very well have been the best wrestler of the Hart family. Give me your thoughts and tell everybody in synopsis the career of Owen Hart, and then we're going to talk about what brings us to the dance tonight.
As we know, Owen Hart, I believe, was 34 years old when he passed away, unfortunately in St. Louis, and unfortunately in a professional wrestling ring. He died doing a stunt as the Blue Blazer, where he would kind of, for lack of a better term, fall into the ring or project with a bungee cord type apparatus. As we all know, as has been discussed and will be discussed on Dark Side of the Ring this week, that clip was not designed for a man of his weight. Yeah. But we're here to discuss the life and career of Owen. Owen started in the youngest of, I believe, 12 children of the Hart family. Bret Hart, Bruce Hart, Diana Hart, who'd married the British Bulldog years later, Davey Boy Smith. Mm-hmm. I believe Owen was the youngest, and his father, Stu Hart, was 50 years old when Owen was born. And Owen was known as the prankster. He was known as the one to pull ribs on his family, to pull ribs on his wife, to pull ribs, practical jokes on the boys in the dressing room. From what I understand, they were never cruel or physically hurtful to anyone, these ribs. They were good-natured, but they would get people, that Owen. He would imitate his father. He would imitate his father and call other people. And then sometimes he would call his father and imitate Reggie Parks or whoever and challenge Stu to a match. I just listened to the Martha Hart Talk is Jericho podcast last night. And I would suggest that for further listening, if people want to hear Martha's point of view, Martha Hart and the wrestling world seem to, as far as the fans, don't have an agreement, because a lot of people want to throw Martha under the bus for not letting Owen go into the Hall of Fame of WWE.
And I want you to hold on to that subject, because we're going to take a deep dive into that later in the conversation.
Well, Owen
thank you for bringing that up. That's an important factor.
Yeah. But Owen was a WWF Tag Team Champion, I think 2 or 3 times with Yokozuna. At WrestleMania 11, they beat the Guns, the Billy and Bart Gun. And I believe he won it, I want to say twice, with Davey Boy Smith. Owen was also, I think, a 2-time Intercontinental Champion. A lot of people don't know or forgot that he actually did wrestle in WCW. I think in the spring, early summer of 1990, Angelo, because he wrestled 2 or 3 matches on WCW Saturday night. Yeah. And Owen was coming off the Rookie of the Year award from Pro Wrestling Illustrated from your buddy Bill Apter. Yeah. And Owen really got started in Calgary Stampede Wrestling, his father's promotion, because they were trying to save the company. He had experience in Japan. He would wear a mask when he first started wrestling, and as we know, he passed away wearing the blue blazer mask.
Mm-hmm.
Owen had a great career. I used to think that Owen probably was not going to, had he had lived longer, I used to think Owen was not headed to a WWE World Heavyweight title. I'm kind of changing my mind a little bit about that, because if you think about the fact that Benoit, Guerrero, a lot of guys, Kurt Angle, started getting the WWE World title around 2004, 2005 that were technically based.
Yeah.
Owen would have been about 38, 39, and maybe they would have made him a world champion in some type of angle with Eddie Guerrero or Benoit or something like that. So it's possible that Owen had a world title run in him. We'll never know at this point.
Yeah. Dan, you're a young guy. So you would have been probably around, let's say 1999 is when Owen passed.
Yeah, I was in high school.
Yeah, I was going to say you were probably, maybe 16, 17. What do you remember about Owen Hart?
Well, I will say, to your point, I agree. Even then, Owen Hart was, I thought he was the best of the Hart family. I mean, my exposure with the territory tapes we had to Stu and some of the other Bruce Hart was a little lower. But Owen was just pure charisma and talent to go off. I mean, the fact that they could put him anywhere. You talked about his tag teams. Yokozuna, tag team champion. British Bulldog tag team champion. He also won the tag titles with Jeff Jarrett when they beat Shamrock and the Boss Man when they were still with the corporation. I mean, here's a guy, you put him with anybody in any situation, pure gold. The King of Hearts.
He was incredibly versatile, Dan.
Exactly. He was
really
also I wouldn't want to call him a high flyer of what we think about that term today.
Yeah.
But when he first started popping up and he was doing the big drop kicks and the spots off the second rope, it was, especially as technically sound as Bret Hart was, it was impressive to see. And his WrestleMania match against his brother, often regarded as one of the best ever, one of my favorite matches.
Yeah, the brother versus brother angle. That was
exactly. And
that's a hard thing to pull off. It's been done, many times in wrestling, and it's a hard thing to pull off, the brother versus brother angle.
Absolutely.
And to make it work effectively. Were it not for the fact that Bret and Owen were so damn good and knew each other so well, that would have been lost to history like so many brother versus brother angles.
And not just...
go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say, not just the quality of the match, but Bret Hart wrestled again that night against a big man. Yeah. Owen Hart had to go into that match knowing he had to get 150% out of Bret Hart, but also had to be extra careful and be extra safe and do everything he needed to do, because the plan was going in, Bret Hart was going to wrestle again a couple hours later. Sure. And the last thing you needed was even the slightest botch. And that was, you could see that level of forced perfection in that match.
Absolutely. I got to see, I want to point out, I never met Owen. I've never met him. But I was in very close proximity to Owen when he was entertaining a group of young children at the Philadelphia Spectrum. They were in the press box. There were special needs kids. And I got to see Owen outside of his character and outside of the ring, because I was literally seated right next to the press box. And I stood up and watched him interact with these kids. And I saw what many people say. He was genuinely one of the nicest guys in all of wrestling. And it's been said about him then, and it's even in memoriam, it's said about him. Could he wrestle? Absolutely. Was he great? Absolutely. But what I saw, because I'm always about the human element. I'm always about the person. That's why I got you two guys here. You're my wrestling gurus. I'm interested in the people. That's where my head is. And I saw him interact with these kids, and that spoke volumes to me about the kind of guy Owen Hart is and was. And he wrestled that night. In fact, he wrestled Shawn Michaels at the Spectrum. And that was a hell of a match. Great match. It went about 40 minutes. And each of these guys were just absolutely blown up by the end of it. It was nonstop. You would have thought you were watching Ospreay and Ricochet. You know?
Right.
It was that kind of momentum. It was nonstop from start to finish. But Dan, let's talk about why we're here. We unfortunately, we're remembering Owen in memoriam because he's not here anymore. And he passed in a very public way and in a very public forum at the Kemper Arena in St. Louis, Missouri. Very famous arena. It's the first and only athletic-related death that arena ever had. Why it happened will be a subject of debate, and we're going to actually go into that a little bit tonight. There are lots of different angles on this and many viewpoints as to who did what, who could have done what. In retrospect, you could have say, coulda, shoulda, woulda, right. But let's not speculate about what coulda, shoulda, woulda. Let's talk about what happened. Mike Messier, take me to WWE headquarters on a Friday night and to the office of Vince Russo.
Well, from what I understand, and please, nobody hold me, stacked to a stack of Bibles on this one, but Vince Russo received a phone call. They were 2 nights or a couple of nights away from the WWE pay-per-view, which I believe WWF at the time called Over the Edge.
Yeah.
Sad, ironic title there.
Yeah, very ironic. Very ironic. Over the Edge.
Right. I think it was the second one, and they never did it again, obviously.
Yeah.
And just as an aside, how much different would wrestling or WWE be had Owen's accident taken place at a WrestleMania or a SummerSlam, or a Survivor Series? But it took place at this kind of May pay-per-view. Vince got a phone call, Vince Russo. A couple of guys were claiming to be the stunt coordinators for Sting's entries into the WCW, which from the ceiling into the ring, where he would attack the NWO with baseball bats. We've all seen that. Mm-hmm. Basically, Russo passed the information along to the higher ups. I don't know exactly who the higher ups were, but they decided to hire these guys. And it's true that they had done these stunts with Owen as the Blue Blazer for 3 or 4 or 5 months going into this pay-per-view. So this was not the first time Owen had done the stunt, which has kind of become a false narrative that it was the first time. It wasn't the first time, but apparently from those that have spoken about it, including Owen's wife, Owen was never terribly comfortable doing this stunt.
Yeah.
He felt pressure apparently because Owen had passed on a storyline where he would fall in love with Deborah McMichael, who was his tag team partner, Jeff
Can
Jarrett.
I stop you there, Mikey?
Go ahead. Sure.
Because it's really important because you're going into an area that's critical to the story.
Yeah.
Owen had probably for the prior, and correct me, Dan, if I'm wrong, but for the prior 6 to 8 months, had done the Blue Blazer gimmick.
That's correct. It was a running gimmick where it was of all people, it was actually Steve Blackman and Goldust that he was having a mini feud with that kept pulling the mask off, and the narrative was Owen Hart didn't know who the Blue Blazer was.
Yeah.
It was.
They
I'll admit,
tried
it was very
to kayfabe it like Owen didn't know.
Exactly. He'd do the backstage segments with the mask in his pocket and that kind of stuff.
But where Mikey is in the story is interesting, and I wanted to stop him there because we must establish that Owen had indeed for months previously had been the Blue Blazer and had come down on the wire. Why then, Mikey, and pick up the story from here, why then all of a sudden, and it seems to me, again, I could be wrong, but it seems to me all of a sudden he becomes uncomfortable with doing, the blue blazer gimmick, and he becomes uncomfortable with the height factor and being lowered down. Explain to me what happened. What was the perceived mindset?
The perceived mindset, and I'm going, just to cite the source, I'm going from the audio doc, which anyone can find on YouTube. I didn't make it. I had nothing to do with it.
Right.
The audio documentary of the final days of Owen Hart, which anyone can find. It's about 35 minutes long. It's a great listen. Basically, the idea was that Owen never felt comfortable doing the stunt, but he feared for his job security if he passed on it. So, yes, He did do the stunt on Raw. He did this stunt a couple of times on Raw, but he never felt good about doing it. So what can I tell you? I mean,
because I have a question for you.
Sure.
We have to keep in mind that Bret, his brother, was by this time out of the company.
WCW. Yeah.
There are people that are saying and have said since it happened. I'm not making this up. This is out there. There are people who have said at the time and still contend that was punishment. Owen was being punished for Bret leaving, and that he forced him into doing this blue blazer gimmick against his will. What do either of you, Dan, what do either of you guys are hearing about this? Tell me.
Well, I will say the information's come out on a few independent documentaries and interviews through the years that following what happened to Bret Hart, Owen was in the group of wrestlers that asked for their release, along with the Bulldog and some of those guys, and Owens was denied.
Yeah.
And he wanted out. I don't know how he felt. Obviously, I can't speak for his mindset at the time, but he wanted out when all that went down.
Yeah.
And you had a booming mid card starting to grow. You had your Ken Shamrock, and you had your Jeff Jarrett and Steve Black. You had so many credible mid carders that he was in a position where one or two bad angles or burials, and he could have fallen completely off the card. I understand the nature of feeling forced to do it.
You're going somewhere, and it's exactly kind of where I want you to go. I'm glad you did. You got to remember, although Owen was incredibly talented and very gifted, let's be honest, who had the stroke here? It was Bret who had the stroke.
Right.
With Bret no longer there, Owen is no longer protected. Neither, by the way, are Davey Boy, Bold, Dynamite Kid, and Neidhart. So I mean, let's be honest about it and call a spade a spade. You got 3 or 4 guys here that, for all intents and purposes, are out on their own.
Pillman's dead by this point. Pillman's already gone.
Yeah, Brian had passed by this point.
You look at you talk about the clout Bret had. The SummerSlam match between Bret and the Bulldog in London was at Wembley Stadium. Bret has said before the Bulldog was so high out of his mind on crack that he could barely see straight. You show up like that and try to have a match with The Undertaker or anybody else besides Bret Hart having your back, you're fired immediately. You probably don't even get through.
Dan, I encourage you, and you too, Mikey, go back now. Go back now, knowing that he was whacked out of his mind. Mm-hmm. Go back and watch that match now. Okay? You will see it. You will see Bret carrying him. Right. Literally carrying him the whole match. He was in no condition to wrestle. He should never have been in that ring, in my opinion.
Just to clarify, that's Davey Boy Smith versus Bret Hart, SummerSlam 92 main event.
Absolutely. Yeah, Wembley Stadium. Right. In front of 84,000 people.
Yes.
Okay. Now, understand now, when Bret leaves to go to WCW, there's probably what, Mikey, 4 months between Bret's departure and Bret's showing up at WCW, because he didn't show up right away.
Actually, he kind of did, Angelo. He showed up because he appeared at Starrcade 97. So Survivor Series 97 was the screw job. And then Starrcade 97 was in December because I was there in the audience.
Mhm.
And Brett
Right.
was the referee for the Sting Hogan match. So he actually did show up 2 or 3 weeks later on WCW.
Right.
Okay,
If you remember
go
the
ahead,
story, Brett broke his hand or his knuckle punching Vince McMahon after the screw job. And
Yeah.
he physically couldn't compete. That's why they kind of shoehorned him into the manager, or not the manager, excuse me, the enforcer role.
That's basically where I was going with that. Thank you, Dan. Because I know that he did not wrestle right away.
He wrestled Flair at Sold Out 98.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was in the spring.
That was a
in January.
colossal waste of talent, in my opinion. Awful. What they did with Brett was awful.
No doubt WCW dropped that ball completely.
Yeah, and there are some people who say that they were paid to drop the ball.
Well, let's get back to the
let's go into the conspiracy realm. Look, we're all about it.
Sure.
There are people who say that because of the relationship between Vince McMahon and Eric Bischoff, which has always been cordial and has always been tight,
right?
They are competitors at the time, but they know each other personally. They know each other. There are people who are saying at the time and even contend today that Eric Bischoff was paid a large sum of money basically to give the big FU to Brett. Put him as a referee. Put him in squash matches. Have him come out wearing a metal chest plate. That was just stupid.
That bit with him hiding the metal and knocking out Goldberg was that teenage me thought that was awesome. Adult me realizes how silly that was.
Out of it.
Teenage me thought that was awesome.
That was hilarious.
I thought Brett claims that was his idea, though. No. Getting back to where we were with the Owen story, from what I understand, just listening to different sources, Owen felt that he had already said no to creative once, and he had said no to the creative idea of Owen having a schoolboy crush on Deborah McMichael, who would also become Deborah, Steve Austin's wife.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was a love triangle, Deborah, Owen, and Jeff Jarrett.
And my understanding, Mikey, is that Owen was adamantly against it. He didn't want to do it. His wife apparently didn't care. She knew the business and understood it was a work, but the kind of person Owen was, he could not in good conscience do that because his children, and he's always thinking of his kids, would have heard it at school.
Right.
Your daddy kissed this lady or whatever the case was.
Right.
And that's, if you listen to Owen's side, and I've heard that argument made, that he basically didn't want his kids to get ridiculed. And I understand that, being a father.
Right.
The other thing is, at the time, and you mentioned the rigging, at the time, this company, as far as I know now, today, this company has misrepresented what they were capable of doing. Mikey, explain this to me. Where did they get the notion that, of course, they can say all day long, oh, we did the ringing for WCW and Sting, and they very well may have.
Right.
But where did they get the notion all of a sudden to, in the middle of dealing with certain people, to just deal with another company off the cuff?
From what I understand, listening to Vince Russo and others talk about this, that they being WWE, WWF, Pat Patterson, Vince McMahon, whomever, were not planning on the Blue Blazer doing the stunt up until, like you said, the Friday or a few days before the pay-per-view. Yeah. What happened to change that was apparently Owen, as the Blue Blazer, was scheduled to win the Intercontinental title from the Godfather, previously Papa Shango.
Yeah.
And when Russo got this phone call, and it was kind of like, hey, at the time, the competition was still pretty intense between WCW and WWE or WWF. Russo passed the phone call on, and the higher-ups said, well, hey, Russo, let's give these stunt coordinators a shot if they're coming from WCW. And I'm just speculating here, but if they work for WCW and work for Sting and provide a service for WCW, if we start hiring these guys more often or pay them better, maybe they'll stick with WWF, and then they can't promote Sting as well with his stunts. Now, the thing that I've heard is that the two guys that did the stunt were like the assistants to Sting in WCW. They weren't even the real guys. They were like the
That's where I'm going. That's what I heard.
That's like a Steven Spielberg assistant director saying, hey, I'm Steven Spielberg. Well, you're not Steven Spielberg, you're his assistant. So these guys were the assistants.
Yeah, it's like saying you directed E.T.
Right.
And Schindler's List.
Right. Apparently, these guys, for whatever reason, in the rush of the weekend to get this pay-per-view, that nobody double-checked their resume, so to speak.
Here's the problem I have, Dan the Man.
What you got?
And tell me if I'm just being conspiratorial or paranoid or what. I have a problem with getting a phone call on a Friday night at 6 or 7 o'clock when nobody's around but Vince Russo, knowing the pay-per-view is Sunday.
Yep.
Okay. How do you plan all of this out from Friday to Sunday? Who has to okay it? Who's got to give the green light? How do you get Owen and these guys together to work out the harness and to work out the details and to see if it's going to be strong enough to carry his body weight? Owen was a big boy. He was 245. Right. Okay. I want people to understand that. Owen Hart was a big guy. He was 6'3", 245 pounds. That's a big man. Okay.
Yep. I think it's important to point out too, is they had a house show Saturday before the pay-per-view.
Yes.
And at the time of this string of pay-per-views, WCW was winning the Monday Night Wars. This was during the period when they were winning the ratings. I can't speak for like I said earlier, I can't speak for another person, but I'm sure Vince Russo, just like everybody else in that office, was under strict instructions. I don't care how silly or bad or short time the idea is. If you have anything that could get us even a 0.1 ratings bump, you come to me immediately. And I'm sure when Vince Russo got that phone call and said we can do a Sting-like stunt, which is, and Mike, you can back me up on this one, the problem too was Sting, when he was lowered, Sting wore a back release harness, like a safety harness like you'd see a construction worker wearing. He wore it under his trench coat.
Yep.
Owen Hart Owen Hart had that fast release buckle because the gimmick was going to be they were going to lower him to about a foot or two over the ring, and then he was going to struggle to get out, and then he was going to fall on his face. Ha ha! Blue Blazer fell down, which obviously he released the buckle, or somehow the buckle got released too soon. So not only are you hiring these phonies, but you're taking a completely different design and trying to get it ready in less than 48 hours.
The kind of harness that they used, and let me explain to the difference. A back harness has a four-pronged approach. There's two at the shoulder and there's two at the waist. Okay? What they lowered Owen on was a ringlet about that big. A metal, I'm not even kidding you, a metal ring about this big.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
That's supposed to support a 6'3", 245-pound human being. That's it. That's the kind of ring that you lower cargo with.
Right.
Not a person. Because if it snaps, you're going to lose a couple of crates. But if it snaps with a person on it, you're going to kill him.
Yep.
especially when you're 91 feet above a ring.
Yeah,
which was exactly how high he was, 91 feet.
Something that's come up before, specifically with this, because Mikey mentioned that they'd done a similar stunt before where they've lowered him from the ring. This was, I believe, the tallest or one of the tallest structures they've lowered him from.
It was
as far
the
as
single
the height of
tallest.
the stadium goes.
The Kemper Arena had a center cap of 91 feet. 91 feet. In other words, Dan, it was at the very epicenter of the top of the arena.
Mm-hmm.
You could to get higher, you'd have to be outside.
You'd be on the roof, yeah.
Standing on the roof. Okay? So we put it into perspective. That's a very, very large building. And it held probably 28,000 people in that neighborhood, 27 and change. Say, if you've never seen the Kemper Arena, Google it sometime. Look at the photos. It's a big place.
No, I remember watching.
You could put Madison Square Garden inside it. Okay?
Yep.
Mike Messier.
Well,
let's talk about the night.
Sure.
And the night leading up to the night. So it's now Friday. Vince Russo gets a phone call. He forwards it to the higher ups. Saturday comes. What happens next?
I could be wrong on this, and I don't want to be wrong. So correct me if I am wrong, Angelo. But I believe what happened was the higher ups put the ball back in Russo's court and said, "Find a spot for this stunt. Find a spot for these guys." The guys,
That's
meaning
pretty much exactly what happened.
And it occurred to Vince Russo, and this is where he gets heat, and I think unfairly so, because it only made sense. The only person that they were using on the roster to kind of bungee cord into the ring like Sting was Owen. So
let me stop you there, because the original plan was to have Owen run down flapping his blue cape.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Russo, as if you listen to him, Russo between Friday and Sunday had to rewrite a good chunk of the show to accommodate the spot.
Right.
And Dan, am I right about that?
No, as far as I know from the interviews everyone's given over the years, that is correct. Vince Russo was very under instruction / determined of his own personal volition to shoehorn this spot in. And like Mikey said, the Blue Blazers entrance is the only place it really made sense. Right.
So now, taking away the love triangle angle, Vince Russo kiboshes that with, at Owen's behest. Mm-hmm. So now they get rid of that. Now they write in this flying entrance. Okay. Right. This is where it gets dicey. So now he has, at some point between Saturday and Sunday, he's got to meet with this rigging crew. All right. They've got to try him on with his gimmick, his outfit.
Mm-hmm. Plus,
they've got to accommodate the rigging for his outfit so that it's not overtly visible. Mikey, you've done films, camouflaging techniques.
Sure.
Okay. And, like they say, hiding the wires,
Right.
We all know Superman's not really flying. He's on a usually like piano wire.
Right.
Which, by the way, is the strongest wire you can find. The interesting thing is they didn't use piano wire for Owen. They used rigging cable, which was the wrong kind of cable. So now he meets with the rigging crew. Do we know, Dan, a timeline based on history of when Owen and Vince Russo may have met with the rigging crew?
From what I understand like I said, from interviews through the years, is the first time they even did a dry walkthrough of it was early Sunday afternoon / late Sunday morning. And they had the plan in place. Owen was he had his gear on. They had some disposable, I don't want to say disposable, but he was going to wear his street clothes so he could kind of sneak through the crowd, walk up through the entryways and whatnot to get him up top where he could finish changing into his kit. So really the first time that Owen wore the cape and the kit and everything was when he was getting ready to get in the harness. I mean, they did a dry run and a fitting, but the first time he was ready to go was the first time they did it. I think that's actually where the narrative that this is the first time he'd ever done this stunt came from, was this particular harness. The first time he ever got in it was when they were getting ready to lower him down.
And Mike Messier, do we know if Vince Russo was part of this with the rigging crew?
Off the top of my head, I don't remember. I would once again refer people to two things now to get the facts fully straight. Owen Hart's Final Day, a post-profile audio documentary. You can find it on YouTube and other sources, 48 minutes and 44 seconds. It's a very chilling listen. I mean, for what it is, it's wonderfully done. It's very professionally done. You can listen to that for free. Apparently, Owen expressed to people, friends of his, Owen's, that he did not want to do this stunt. He was apprehensive. And apparently he had a phone call either the day or 2 days before the stunt on pay-per-view. And he was basically told, do the stunt or lose your job. I want to give another quick reference for people that want to do their own research, because don't take our word for it. Do your own research.
Absolutely.
Fanbyte.com, FANBYTE.com. The Owen Hart Police Report is a chilling reminder of WWE's history with worker safety, April 3rd, 2020. This is a long article, but apparently it has a link to the actual police report from the Owen Hart death, and it's from David Bickenspan, who is a bit controversial and outspoken.
Yeah.
But within Bickenspan's article, the 73-page file is now released for anyone that wants to read it. You can read it and make your own conclusions.
Okay. Now, Dan.
Yeah.
So the day of the event is the first time he puts on the gimmick, puts on the harness, and does a dry run through. Is that what happens now?
From what I understand from the interviews and other comments that have been made is, yes, they did some test fittings and kind of a walkthrough. But the first time he is in full costume, full cape, full tight, full harness is when he's in the rafters ready to come down.
Okay. Now, clearly there was a pay-per-view going on.
Correct.
And Owen, at some point during the night, has to make his way up to the catwalk.
Yes.
Okay. Now, how does he get there? Who meets him there? Who rigs him up? And who's in charge of lowering him?
They had the riggers and the crew staged in the area of the catwalk. As I mentioned earlier, they had Owen Hart, had his gear on. He had his blue blazer outfit, mask in his pocket. He wore jeans. There's actually pictures floating around the internet, various fans that recognized him in the concession area and the stairs. And he went through the crowd, through the concession area, through the stairs to the back entrance, which would at that point be unlocked, to make his way to the gangways and to the catwalk, where he changed down, got his mask, got his cape on, and met with the riggers, and they strapped him in.
Okay. So now, the match preceding the Blue Blazer match, it ends. There's a lull in the action. On the pay-per-view, you don't see anything happening in the ring.
Correct.
The camera's focused on Jim Ross and Jerry the King Lawler sitting by ringside.
For the WWF's at the time, for the WWF's advantage, while Jim Ross was explaining that the Godfather was going to defend the Intercontinental title against the Blue Blazer, they did a pan shot of the crowd, and it was during that secondary pan shot when he fell, and you could hear the commotion and everything.
Well, you could hear him hitting the ring.
Yes, you had the commotion, and when it cut back to Jim Ross, Jerry Lawler was no longer present because he had gotten up and run to the ring.
Yeah.
And that was when Jim Ross, in what is probably one of his most famous calls, explained that, it's wrestling is scripted. What you're seeing, something terrible has happened. Owen Hart fell. It's not part of the show. It's not part of the script. It's a real emergency. We've got medical crews. And I remember watching this while watching the pay-per-view. And then at that point, they're explaining everything that's happening. The camera's obviously not on the ring. They're staying, like you said, staying on Jim Ross. Jerry Lawler came back, and he looked distraught. And Jim Ross made a comment about it looks bad, and Jerry Lawler just very casually put his headset on and said, "Yeah." And that, me as a teenager, as soon as Jerry Lawler said that, I was like, Owen Hart is dead. Like it was obvious that he technically wasn't declared dead until he had left the ring, but at that point you knew what was happening.
Yeah. Well, now I want to warn people that the next segment of the show is a bit graphic. So my advice to you would be, if you don't want to hear it, to tune out now. But if we're going to give this any justice, we have to be honest in all regard. So, Mike Messier, what happens next is Owen is lowered, in the process of being lowered, and almost immediately the buckle snaps.
Right.
And he's approximately, at this point, some 90 feet above the ring. When the buckle gives way and the harness snaps, he doesn't go straight down to the center of the ring. Had he hit the center of the ring, he probably would have bounced up quite a bit, got the wind knocked out of him, and maybe survived. That's not what happened. He came down from the ceiling at full velocity, and he hit the turnbuckle first. Actually, he hit the ring post. That's solid metal.
Mm-hmm.
And he bounces from the turnbuckle ring post to about the center of the ring, or quite near the center. Now, at this time, to Dan's point, the camera is on JR. They pan around. You can hear a thud. You can hear it. You don't see anything, but you can hear clearly something very loud hitting that ring. And then you can hear people go, kind of like that. Okay? They never, to their credit, they never addressed the ring until Owen was out and on his way back. But he was already gone at this point. We pretty much now already know that. Mm-hmm. that he had passed on before he left the ring. There are people at the time, because don't forget we had cell phones, and many of them had cameras on them, and many had video. And there are a lot of videos floating around and a lot of photos from that night. I have not seen any of them purposely. I don't want to. It's not something that I take glory in. But as I said to people, this is a disturbing aspect of what happened that night. A man died in front of an arena full of people. Rather than, and this is where I want you two guys to chime in and have a debate, about this. Let's all kind of talk about it. Dan,
yeah.
Should they have cleared out the arena? Or, as the old adage in show business, Mikey, the show must go on. What do you think? Talk to me, guys.
Personally, I think at that point, you call it. Refund if you have to. Reschedule if you have to. I think you call it. I'm like I said, I remember watching the pay-per-view. The show went on. The crowd, you could tell that the crowd was. I'm trying to think of a good word because you know the usual expression.
Aghast.
Yeah,
You can't say they say dead crowd. You want to say
the crowd was out of it. The crowd was out of the show. I think it was incredibly poor, at least, like I said, in hindsight, I think it was incredibly poor taste to continue, especially for the other performers that were forced to go out there. I don't know if they changed the canvas. I don't know what they did, but you were standing. What's that?
I don't think they did. I think the wrestler they had to wrestle on Owen's blood.
In fact, the next person out, let me remind you, was The Rock. Was the very next person out, was The Rock. So The Rock had to follow that.
Yeah.
I think they should have called it. I think they should have said, folks, go home. We're done here. We have a problem, and we got to address it.
And I don't think, with as beloved as Owen Hart was by wrestling fans, I don't think anybody in that crowd would have been. I mean, maybe disappointed, but I don't see people being angry. Like, oh man, I don't care that some dude just died. I paid for 3 hours, man. Where's the damn main event? I ain't seen The Rock yet. Give me my money back. I don't think people would have felt that way. I think fans would have understood.
Go ahead, Mikey.
I wanted 3 things. I'll make it quick. One, the way I remember things, that when Owen actually fell, what we were seeing on TV was a promo of Owen as the Blue Blazer in the dressing room, a pre-tape promo.
Yes.
And I believe that was what was airing at the exact moment of the fall. You can call it ironic, you can call it poetic, you can call it chillingly odd, but just a weird deal that as this man is falling to what would be his death. It was
being interviewed in the back by, I believe, Todd Pettengill.
Right. Or was it Lillian Garcia? I thought Pettengill was gone by then, but what was it? Maybe it was.
I thought it was. I don't know. I thought it was a guy.
Okay. Well, the point is that it was just an odd.
But if it was situation. Lillian Garcia, close enough.
Sure. But the point is just an odd situation that while he's dying, we see him talking about the little Blue Blazers and doing the right thing and the Blue Blazers your hero. So very strange.
Exactly what happened is at that moment is when he fell.
Now, when he did fall, one thing that's come up several times, I believe it was referee Jimmy Carderas was in the ring about to do the Blue Blazer versus Godfather Intercontinental title match, which once again was supposed to be a switch of the title to the Blue Blazer. And apparently, Owen was yelling at him, get out of the way, get out of the way, because Owen knew that he was in trouble, but he didn't want to land on Carderas. So one of Owen's last acts on this earth was quite literally to spare or help save the life of a fellow wrestling personality, a referee. His final act was to help someone else not get hurt. And who knows?
The ironic thing, Mikey, is that if he had fallen on Mikey Carderas, they'd both be still alive today. Right. Only Mikey is.
Then the third thing I wanted to say.
That's the ironic thing.
Right.
Had he hit him, they would both still be with us.
Right.
And, of course, only one is.
We don't know who's to say the extent of the injuries? Do you have a thought on that, Angelo? How much the injuries would have been to Carderas or to Owen if he had landed on him?
Well, because the human body is made up of flesh, bone, and tissue, it's very pliable.
Right.
Okay. You think of it this way, Mikey. You're a filmmaker. You're doing a stunt. You got a guy that's going to jump off the 6th or 7th floor of a building. He's going to come down on an airbag. All right? Mm-hmm. That's tantamount to landing on a person.
Right.
You're going to cushion the blow. Yeah. Will somebody get hurt? Yeah. Will they both die? No.
You look at a good bit for the science, if our fans out there want to check it out. The television show Mythbusters did a bit where they were testing the myth of hitting water at a certain speed is the same as hitting concrete, and while the bodies they were dropping, they were using pig carcasses, were being damaged hitting the water, it was always worse hitting a solid object, even something like water or something solid. Yes, I mean, like Mikey said, who knows the extent of the injuries, but had he hit Kardaris, had he hit further into the ring, into something with a give to it, it would not have been as hard, as fatal, or excuse me, as damaging as it was hitting the ring post and turnbuckle the way he did.
Absolutely. I mean, you think about that. Okay, so you break your leg, you break your arm, you're laid up for a little while, but you're breathing.
Yeah.
And you're alive.
I want to get to the point about should the show have gone on, because just to play
Mikey, that's always been a point of contention, whether the show should have stopped the show and sent people home.
Well, I'm gonna
always been a big thing.
First, I'm going to give you the what if. What if that was Stephanie McMahon who fell? What if that was Shane McMahon or Vince McMahon or Stone Cold Steve Austin or The Rock or The Undertaker? What if it was an A+ player, not an A- player like Owen was at that time? Would that have made a difference?
They would have had that crowd emptied in 30 minutes.
Now, here's where I'm going to flip side, just for the sake of argument, just so we can say that we covered both topics, sides of the same topic.
Right.
To be fair, it is possible that in the anxiety of the situation, wrestling people, as Angelo knows, are trained, and the mindset is the show must go on. And if anyone is going to live to that, it was WWF in 1999 when business was booming. They were finally getting ahead of WCW in this Monday Night War. All things were running on overtime, on adrenaline and money. And perhaps to give them a little bit of a break here, they did not know what to do. There was no protocol for this.
I'll give you a perfect real-life scenario, okay?
Sure.
In 1976, my father got tickets for myself and my sister and my cousins to go to see Dick Clark's Rock and Roll Review at the Latin Casino in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. One of my favorite singers was going to be on the show that night, named Jackie Wilson.
Yep.
The night that we were going to go, Jackie Wilson had a heart attack on stage and was brain dead from that moment on.
Wow.
And was laid up in a New Jersey hospital for 9 months before he finally succumbed to his injuries. We went the next night. The show went on. Dick Clark still had his show, but only instead of Jackie Wilson, it was a fine entertainer named Chuck Jackson. You might know him from the song Any Day Now.
Right.
Okay. Big shoes to fill. Tough spot to be in. You know they didn't come to see you, but you've got to be there and you've got to perform and you've got to be on your A game because that's what these people are paying for. I can make the argument, yeah, you can do that. But when you're talking about taking that kind of a fall in front of 28,000 people with kids in the audience, I don't care. Maybe you bite the bullet financially. Maybe you give away, give some refunds or give some, use your ticket for the next show. Good for the next event.
Right.
That's fine. But I think it was in extremely poor taste to continue that show knowing a guy just died in front of you.
Yeah. And
the crowd knew it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can say honestly that if it were me as Vince McMahon, I would have called the show as well. And from what we understand, Owen wasn't officially proclaimed dead until he got to the hospital. But
That's
still,
true.
They still had a title change. One thing people forget is that The Undertaker actually beat Steve Austin for the title on the main event of that show.
Yeah,
so,
nobody even remembers it.
They still went through with storylines. They still went through with the title change.
Well, at that point, what choice have you?
That's what I'm saying.
You only have one of two choices. Really, guys, you only have one of two choices. Dan, you either continue with the show,
right,
or you send everybody home. Those are the only two choices you got.
Yeah.
The question is,
right.
did they make the right choice? I think they could have bit the bullet a little bit financially. They weren't going to lose anything.
I think in the long run, history is going to say they should have stopped the show. But from the things that matter to Vince McMahon, the following Raw, the Owen Hart tribute Raw was one of the highest rated of the year. Ticket sales continued to go up. Merch kept going. Yeah. History isn't going to. It wasn't some critical turning point the way it could have been had it been a more hot, like you said, an A+ versus an A- player. I think in the grand scheme of things, life went on pretty quickly. You said there were title changes. They continued. And for a couple months after, some wrestlers wore the OH armbands, and that was about it. Life went on. And
well, Dan, it's a funny thing about wrestling. It really is the purest form of show business, because the show, true to form, Mike Messier, the show must and always does go on.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Again, weren't me, I would have made a different decision. Maybe being there, maybe not. You don't know. Now, without taking the deep dive here, because I'm not going to go here, but I do have to bring it up, because everybody knows that on this show we love a good conspiracy. Now, we already know Vince McMahon has blood on his hands. Some of it deliberately, some of it quite accidentally. There are people that are saying, and have said from the beginning, this was payback for Bret. Would Vince do that? Could Vince do that? Two different questions. Would he and could he? Could he? Sure. Would he? I don't think so. I'm going to put an end to the conspiracy. Again, much as I love a good conspiracy, I'm going to put a kibosh on the conspiracy theories that Vince McMahon had Owen whacked.
Right.
Because I don't think that was the case. He was too beloved an individual. Everybody liked him. He was a nice guy. And what did Vince have to gain by offing Owen?
Well, and you
Nothing.
also have to think from Vince McMahon's mindset. We talked on the show before with the Ultimate Warrior, with Hulk Hogan. There's always, you even had Jim Cornette at the Hall of Fame ceremony with the Rock and Roll Express. There's always, the whole never say never mantra. Vince McMahon is willing to forgive and forget if it means he's going to make money. And if you look at the crowd, blue blazer masks were a popular selling item.
Sure.
Owen Hart got his nugget chance. You had a star that was making you money. I don't care if Vince McMahon thought, if Bret Hart walked in and personally strangled Vince McMahon's puppy in front of him, if Owen Hart's making him money, he's not gonna get rid of that. Period.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
I have emailed. We're on the Skype chat, guys. I've sent in the chat the document of this police report that is on the Bick and Span article that I read earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never.
Yeah, I saw that come through. Thank you, Mike.
I've never looked at a police investigation report before in my life. I've never had reason to, but here I am looking at it. And so I would just say, once again, for further reference, folks, find that Owen Hart audio doc, 44 minutes, and find this police report on Bick and Span's article on Fanbyte with a Y. My feeling, guys, is I remember watching the pay-per-view. I remember as soon as I saw Jim Ross's face, and then Jerry Lawler came back to the desk and they were talking about this, I knew that Owen had died. in my heart. And I remember watching the pay-per-view with about 20 people because we had these big pay-per-view parties back then. And one guy was making jokes, and I just found it distasteful. And I just had a feeling that Owen this was the way that Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler looked, as if they had just their color, as their face was pale white. I don't think that Vince McMahon, as much as I've had issues with him and his policies, I don't think he had Owen killed. I think it was neglect, perhaps. It was
clearly
lack of responsibility, a lack of attention. Do I think it was a hit or a murder? No. But I don't blame Martha Hart for her anger. I don't blame Martha Hart for keeping Owen's name out of the WWE Hall of Fame. I believe that listening to Talk is Jericho with Martha, and Martha's saying that the WWF once sued her because they wanted the case to be settled in Connecticut, which was to their WWE's advantage or WWF's advantage. So I'm very sympathetic to this Martha Hart lady. I think Jericho handled that interview with a lot of class and a lot of tact. And he knows that a lot of fans have this grudge in their own mind against this poor woman, Martha Hart. But what people have to understand is Owen was her life. That were the high school sweeties.
Well, here's the question I have, Dan. When did Martha become vilified in this? She's the widow.
Yeah, I think the vilification of her, because she was, like you said, she was the widow and she was the sympathetic figure, because you had the crying widow, you had the connection with the Hart family who had already suffered some tragedy. Then obviously, as Mikey mentioned, there was the lawsuit. There was also some various legal letters related to trademarks and merchandise. Yeah. And she kind of got the short end of the stick from it and was the sympathetic figure over time. As the aura and the legend of Owen Hart grew, and people more and more wanted, they wanted a statue, they wanted some kind of Owen Hart Memorial Cup, a tournament, a Hall of Fame, something. She kept putting her foot down, saying, "Keep his name out of your mouth. I don't want it anywhere near that company." Yeah. Once it was no longer the WWF and it was the fans that wanted to remember him, I think that's when she started becoming the villain. Not for anything that she did wrong per se, but when she started going against the will of the fans, that's when the fans kind of turned on her.
Well, there's a fine line between doing what's right for the fans and doing what's right for your family.
Correct.
So that's the tightrope that she has to walk. You know, it's a fine line in wrestling. You know, and like I said to Bill Apter, wrestling fans are a strange breed of people.
Right.
We're a strange animal.
Yeah.
There's, I mean, you know, God bless us, everyone, but, you know, wrestling fans are unique.
Well, like I said before, wrestling fans are simultaneously the greatest and worst human beings on the planet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We are the quintessential mixed bag of nuts. Go ahead, Mike.
If I could, I think that I kind of came into tonight thinking that we'd be talking more about Owen Hart matches and memories from a fan's perspective. And I don't know if you want to keep going with the talk about his death. We can, Angelo, but I do have some good memories of his career.
We're going to wrap it up here in about 10 minutes anyway. So, yeah, I didn't want to really talk about his matches, Mikey, because, you know, that's a thing of public record. You know, we already know Owen's, you know, matches and, you know, his level of professionalism and, you know, his competitive nature as an athlete. We know how good he was. Right. That's without dispute. There's no need to really go there. But I wanted to take this opportunity, you know, to remember Owen, you know, the legacy, the person, the athlete. But in order to do that, we had to talk about how he passed.
Yeah.
Sadly, it's unavoidable. That's why I told people about halfway through this, you know, tune out now if you want, but some of this stuff is graphic.
Well, we know that Kevin Owens, or Kevin Steen, named his son after Owen Hart.
Yeah.
And that is why Kevin Steen wrestles with the WWE name of Kevin Owens.
Yeah.
Because it's the last name Owens is a tribute to his son, but of course his son was named after Owen Hart.
Yeah.
For me, I was there at the King of the Ring 1994, which Owen Hart won. And that was a kind of a coronation of Owen as a main event player. That's when he became a main event guy. Yeah. And if you look at the year 1994, although Owen never won a single title that year in WWF, he started off as a babyface. He turned on his brother Brett at the Royal Rumble. He had a match with him at WrestleMania 10 that you guys discussed. That was great. Mm-hmm. He won the King of the Ring 94, which went to the SummerSlam cage match. Yeah. Another classic match with Brett. And he did not win the title for Brett, but he helped Bob Backlund defeat Bret Hart in one of the best swerve angles ever. Yes. With the throwing in of the towel. And that was probably Owen Hart's breakthrough year. In 95, he wins the tag team title with Yoko. Kind of does that. 96, he had that great classic match that I love against British Bulldog in Europe for the European title. He wins the Intercontinental title from young Rocky Maivia. Yeah. When Brett leaves, as we discussed, Owen, I guess that's when you saw Owen versus Shawn Michaels, Angelo. Yeah. Was late 97. And in 98, he was feuding with, 98, he was feuding with Triple H, the tag team with Jeff Jarrett. So the point is, the guy packed a lot of wrestling legacy for his own life, not just being a Hart, but being Owen Hart. Having a great career that I do.
And let us not forget, 2-time Slammy winner too.
Yes, a bow tie, the best bow tie. I mean, a guy who, like, when you think about certain guys like Chris Jericho, Jericho was kind of holding on to that torch that guys like Pillman and Owen left behind for him.
Sure.
Owen had a great match with Pillman, Brian Pillman Sr. on Monday Night Raw.
Don't forget, you have to remember something about Chris Jericho. He's Canadian.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. He's got a legacy. Not only his legacy, it's his Canadian legacy. Right. He was friends with these guys. He trained with them. He grew up with them.
I was going to say Jericho and Lance Storm. That was the final graduating class of the Hart Dungeon.
Exactly. At one time or another, they all came through Stu Hart's dungeon.
Yeah.
All of them.
Which, interesting side note, Lance Storm recently brought up with all the discussion about Owen Hart that he apparently, when he was working as a producer, pitched the idea of buying the Hart House when it went up for sale and having the Hart House. Having the Hart House be where they filmed Tough Enough. And apparently
I heard that. Yeah.
Somebody, I guess they decided that was too good of an idea or they wouldn't want to do it. But
yeah, of course.
Yeah, I thought that would have been classic. But,
that's like funny. I said before, Dan, if it makes sense, count on him not to do it.
Exactly. Mikey brought up a good point, and I think that's part of the aura that Owen Hart has. You talk about his legacy, his persona from when he first broke out to be like really start to get the attention by himself instead of being the shadow, to the day he died was a span of just under 5 years. It was late 1993 to 1999. It's, I guess, just over 5 years. I mean, to have literally a lifetime career that people will remember forever in the span of 5 years. Yeah. I mean, think about somebody like a Brock Lesnar. He has 3 matches over the course of 5 years.
I know.
Here's Owen Hart has an entire career.
Think about that. Span. Think about that, Dan. Think about that.
Yeah, all those moments that Mikey...
So, Dan, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
How do you want to remember Owen Hart? How should people remember this guy?
I think
in a couple of sentences.
I think what you said nails it. Owen Hart needs to be remembered as the person. Not, yes, he was a great talent, but he was a person. I don't want to get into too much of my own story, but I saw that a live house show, and he was just being a prankster. The foreign object they ended up using in the match was a Wendy's napkin. You recognize those old yellow napkins everywhere. Outside of an indie show, that is the most fun I've ever. You can tell when wrestlers are having fun in the ring.
Yes.
And the way he just brought the fun out in the ring and the crowd. I think people need to remember him for as good of a person as he was, more than obviously more than the way he died and more than the entertainer is. He was in a business that will chew you up, spit you out, and burn you out instantly.
Yes.
He kept a good heart and a good head for his entire run.
He was the King of Hearts.
Absolutely.
Mike Messier, in a couple of sentences, how do you want people to remember Owen?
He was a family man, a man that loved his wife. He loved his kids. He loved his parents. He loved his brothers and sisters. And I think he did love professional wrestling. I think Martha might have that spouse thing where you hear the dark side or the sad side of your husband's career, but maybe Martha herself didn't know that. I think Owen really did enjoy wrestling. And he did enjoy the fans especially. And he was doing Airbnb before there was Airbnb. He was he was staying at fans' homes, apparently. I don't know if he ever stayed with you in New Jersey, Angelo.
No, never have. I never met him. I never met him. No, it's what you said, though, it touched upon something. You'll never understand the wife's perspective.
Right.
This is the person who knows him the best, the person that's closest to him, the one he's most intimate with. You know, we can speculate as fans of Owen Hart, but we'll never understand what happens between two people like that. Right. Their bond is their bond, and that's theirs. It's their story. I think if Martha Hart should ever hear this, thank you for sharing your husband with the world, and thank you for sharing his talent with me. I appreciate it, and I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to see him wrestle and to see him interact with people. Mm-hmm. That was more telling for me than anything you could ever put inside of a squared circle.
Right.
So, on behalf of Mike Messier, who is, by the way, a walking website, MikeMessier.com, tell everybody, Mikey, what's going on in the world of Mike Messier and YouTube and Wrestling with the Future and Mike Messier YouTube and all that, whatever the hell you got going on.
We're doing life lessons with Mikey Messier. I did a special 2.5-minute life lessons last night in respect to the Michael Jordan documentary. Just a little.
I saw that.
Yeah, just a little quickie, but most Mike Messier life lessons episodes on the Wrestling with the Future podcast channel are about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So I try to give lessons that the listener or the watcher can apply. I've been working on a couple of screenplays this week, Angelo. My film festival, Avalonia Festival, which I even have the Avalonia Festival mouse pad for my own writing purposes. But people can go to Avalonia Festival and enter their film. There is a pro wrestling film category.
He's shameless. Dan, he is a shameless promoter.
You gave him the airtime to hype himself up. He's going to use it to sell his own merchandise.
Absolutely.
If you go to Amazon, there are Mike Messier T-shirts available, which Mike Messier.
Why don't you take some of them millions? Take some of them millions of dollars that your films are generating.
Oh, yeah.
And throw some in the Wrestling with the Future mouse pads.
Well, I have to get
Let me show you my mouse pad, okay? It's a plain black mouse pad. That's it.
Well, I need to get a 3XL Wrestling with the Future
Dan.
T-shirt.
This is what you see this? It's 20 years old.
So everything is good. You know, people can connect with me on Twitter. I've got Mikey Messier, Angry Wrestling Fan. And I've got the Avalonia Fest, 2 Twitter accounts, Mike Messier on Facebook and MikeMessier.com for all your Mike Messier needs, wants, and desires.
And desires. Go ahead, Dan. All 30 seconds of you. No.
Oh, man, you're right. Ain't no time left for me. Just
Take
to tell
time.
everybody, you can check out wrestling. You can check out Wrestling with the Future. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on YouTube, Wrestling with the Future podcast. I'm on Twitter, _WWTF. You can also check out the shirts. Don't forget for those watching, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Buy the T-shirt. And
yes.
Wrestling with the Future T-shirt. This is some prime T-shirt material right here.
Absolutely. And they're cheap. $20 each.
Not
or
bad.
2 for $30.
Oh, even better.
20 each, 2 for $30. While supplies last. And I got a shitload of them. And by the way, thank you guys for doing a joint collective effort on the YouTube channel. I know, Mikey, you're uploading wrestling related videos now.
Yep.
I had looked at this one. I don't know what the hell I was watching, Mikey. Something about the fire of Zen.
The nature of the flame. It's my
flame
Zen
of Zen or whatever
film.
Frig that was.
My Zen feminist film, Angelo. But the
Yeah,
rest,
not on Wrestling with the Future.
you didn't like
Keep that on Mike Messier's YouTube.
Well, I'm just trying to get crossover appeal. But one last thing about Owen Hart, guys.
What I would like you to do, though, while we're on the subject, why don't you put Ox Baker, one of the boys, up there?
I will do that. I will do that for everybody.
Why don't you do that? Absolutely.
And one last thing about Owen Hart.
Yes.
A friend of mine, Colin Steele, who actually went to that King of the Ring that Owen won with me, Colin Steele has always suggested, and I'll share it now with the audience, that Owen Hart be played in a feature film about his life by Owen Wilson. Colin has always pointed out that Owen Wilson's face looks just like Owen Hart.
You know what? He really does. Yeah.
Owen is Owen.
And you know what? I could see Owen Wilson because he's got that kind of personality.
Right.
He does. He really does. He could pull off Owen Hart. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I've shared it with.
He wouldn't have to change his name for the character. It's Owen.
Owen is Owen, and I've shared Colin's idea. I don't have the funding for this project, but I could write it and direct it if anyone wants.
Cast him now, Mikey.
Man, anything to plug yourself, huh?
Why not?
Nobody else is going to do it. He may as well.
You got to put yourself over in this world because no one else will. But
oh shit.
For those fans, just real quick, recommended viewing of Owen Hart matches. Watch the King of the Ring '94 if you can get through Art Donovan's play-by-play. If you can find that Raw.
How much does that guy weigh?
Oh, horrible! If you could find, is he a businessman? He's talking about IRS. If you can find that guy. Yeah. If you can find Owen
Art Donovan, Jesus.
Versus Owen versus Davey Boy for the European title in the tournament final, I think in February of '96. Owen versus Brett, the cage match, the WrestleMania 10.
Yeah, they can just go on YouTube, search Owen Hart. You'll find them all.
You'll find all these good matches.
So,
Talk and sing.
Dan the Man. It's Dan the Man _ WWTF Twitter.
Just the man. The man _ WWTF.
Gotcha. Okay.
And not to risk plugging our competition, but when I set the I started in professional wrestling. I was at a syndicated column on NoDQ.com, an old sports entertainment website.
Yeah.
Aaron Rift, who's a pretty well-known commentator in the social media world, was my first follow when I created that Twitter account. So shout out to my old boss there.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And where is our Twitter?
Say again?
Where is our Twitter?
Our Twitter is Wrestling Future. That's no G. That's Wrestling Future. And you can find Wrestling with the Future on Twitter as well as Facebook, both groups, private and public.
Yes. I've decided to leave up the public group at Mike Messier's behest. So I concede it to you. Okay.
Thanks, buddy.
You got one victory over me.
I got one victory. I got the public page is so that people can find us as a gateway to the private group.
True.
How about that?
Yeah. The link to the private group is on that page. And of course, if you want to join the private group, and we got a lot of members now, well, like almost 200 of them, right?
Yes.
Or
we want more.
Yeah. So just answer a couple of questions and you're in. They're real easy questions. You want to find me on Facebook? It's real easy, Angelo DeCipio. Or you can find me through my psychic page, Psychic Angelo, at Facebook. Real easy. You can find me on Twitter at The Psychic Angelo. and at Wrestling Future. Easy enough. 4, Mike Messier, MikeMessier.com. 4, Dan the Man Sebastiano at theman_WWTF. I am Psychic Medium Angelo. Just Angelo. Hey, yo. What are you laughing at, Dan? He's smirking at me. You know what? You wait till we get off here. For these two goofballs, I'm Psychic Medium Angelo. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Happy wrestling. We'll see you next time.